indeed, whatever's appropriate for you. We have had apologies this morning from Sir Craig Mackey and Emir Faisal, and Willie is on Teams sitting at the back of the room. Morning, Willie. It's interesting to note, by the way, that there are only 7 members present in the room, and look how full it is. If we get the next batch of joiners, then I think we're going to need a bigger room. So just note that one, please. Are there any declarations by authority colleagues in terms of any agenda items this morning? Okay, can I turn your attention to the minutes, item 3? And as usual, I'll go through the minutes page by page. And if anybody has any points or issues they wish to raise, please do so as I get to that page. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page yes, Stuart.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise the EDI workshop in May, and I have discussed this with you. And can I just put on record the very prompt, professional support from Hugh in particular in providing the answers I asked on this. So I wasn't able to attend the workshop. First of all, the least important issue, I do have, and it's a matter of public record, I do have a big problem with critical race theory being part of the workshop. I think it is, personally, I think it is a contested theory, and I think it's quite a divisive theory, and ministers in particular have deprecated its proliferation in the public sector. But that's a value judgment. I accept others will have a view. What concerned me about this workshop is the cost, because for 2 half-days and some meetings, the cost was £29,000, which I think is a very significant outlay. Were the force and the authority in a position where it was consistently failing its public sector equality duty under the Equality Act, I can understand that a non-statutory item at that cost as an imperative would be needed. Now, I accept we all did agree at the meeting in March that there should be a workshop, but I do think that's quite a high fee. I know that that was really as a result of the fact that they were the only provider, and clearly the laws of economics are when you have a monopoly provider, the price goes up. And because we sought to do it quickly, the procurement process was only one provider, as I understand. I also think that we've got a very good expert in-house capacity for equality and diversity issues. And I do think that, this is my view and others will no doubt take issue, we could have delivered this in-house, I think, at within the budget of the authority and the force. So I think in terms of the tendering process and procurement, and in terms of time, and how quickly it was done, I do think it could have been done in a different way. And just going back finally to the initial bit about the critical race theory, I actually think it probably detracts from really interesting qualitative stuff around first-person testament of the experience of those people who suffered discrimination in the force. And I hope, and I will attend the September workshop where I will interrogate the facilitators, but I do think it was, for what it cost, I'm not sure that it was the most appropriate level of expenditure. That's my view.
Thanks.
We're happy to hear others.
Sure. Well, I'll throw it open now to colleagues.
Can I just clarify the procurement?
Yes.
So we went out to, it was 3 or 4 providers, but unfortunately in the end we only had 1 submission, so we didn't go on a single tender, just to confirm that.
Any other points?
So
Oh, sorry, Bev, you just reminded me. One other thing. I think between the March full authority meeting and the delivery, I think it probably should have gone to people and culture, so we could have had some input in terms of the design. But I mean, other Bev, my view.
So the test I went to, is it relevant? Is it appetite? Do our internal experts feel that it was the right thing to do from their perspective? And I think the answer was yes. I don't want to speak for anyone. In terms of, it was all about lived experience. So there were BTP staff who were there giving their lived experience, and they were able to do that in the safety of being wrapped around people who were professional in this area, including, and forgive me, I've forgotten his name, including very senior police officers who also shared their lived experience. So I felt it was a really good course, and it was a shame you couldn't be there, students. So
Anybody else, any comments?
So I was not at the March meeting, so I can't comment on or involved in procurement, so I can't comment on that. What I would say is, I think sometimes you do need an external facilitator to ensure that you can get good, robust debate. I run a very large EDI function in another organisation as part of my role, and we recognise that sometimes it's better to bring the outside in to challenge what can be sort of limited thinking and own biases. I think we all recognise, whether it be the Met Police report or the reports that have been done on other forces, that there is a systemic issue in policing. And I think that, you know, if it was that easy to solve internally, with the problems that we have, and I'm sure it's here as well, whether, you know, it's not always a comfortable fact to look at, but we have to recognise that some people haven't had the experiences we want them to have. So going on the course, and it is challenging, and I think facilitate is challenging. But actually, I think sometimes we'll need that mirror. So I probably would not concur, Stuart, with the view that sometimes, and that's not, Karen, anything with your ability, because I know you're very good and very strong. But I think sometimes having somebody else who can help people bring forward what their experiences have really been with a bit of a safety net. And I think everybody was heard from in the room that said they haven't previously felt comfortable being able to do that. And that's the people who coming from a non-white background, explaining the experiences that they've had in this force, as well as hearing as well from Neil, who was excellent, explaining his experience elsewhere. So that's my view on it.
Yeah, sure.
Chair, just I think from my point of view as a chief officer who had the pleasure of attending that workshop, I think the value of the external, certainly from my point of view, is policing has had 30 years of doing it in-house in relation to racism since my person. So, and hasn't achieved the outcome. So for me as a chief officer, that was really positive. Disclosure that I have regarding that was I thought I understood the problem as a result of that direct attendance at that workshop. I have now shifted my view, and in terms of timeliness, accepting the procurement work piece, I think at the time when policing in the UK is quite rightly robustly challenged in itself on its thinking on institutional racism and the positioning with two forces already declaring that position. For me as the chief officer in the force, it was right and proper that we had that urgency and went to that workshop as quickly as we did.
Thank you very much, Sean. Anybody else want to make any comments? Thank you. Well, we'll note all colleagues' comments on this point, and we can pick this up when we come to the next stage of the ED&I training later in the year. I now carry on with the minutes. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. Page 10. Page 11. Page 12. Page 13. Can I take it, my authority colleagues, that we're attend to the minutes are inaccurate for the meeting? Ron? Yes, Lucy.
It was just a point, so I can't, for some reason, let me get online at the moment, but just in relation to Rabila's cover note over the finance paper, we've listened back to the recording and we are satisfied that there isn't an inaccuracy in the minutes. But what, on reflection, we do feel is that there is a between the forces cover paper and between the forces paper and revealers cover note, there is not a harmonious position between the two, just in relation to the unfunded cost pressures. So it's not a accuracy note for the minutes, but I think it's something that we'll probably draw out later on in the agenda.
Okay, sure. Can we go forward then to the next agenda item, which is the actions arising from the minutes? All of them are regarded as completed. Does anyone have a different view or wish to make any points or questions in relation to those three? Thank you. We'll take them as read. Risk register, did you want to say anything to you?
Short answer is no, because we've got a workshop on the 11th of July. And given how much you've got on the agenda, I thought we should not spend a lot of time on this today unless any other colleagues have got observations. We'll have a chance to discuss on the 11th of July.
Okay, I will throw it open in case anyone has any points, questions they want to raise.
Just to say, at committees where we've taken various of these risks, we've had kind of annotated version, so we can see the changes from last time. We seem to have lost that in this version, which is a bit of a shame, really, because it was quite helpful. There's no red text about it.
Anybody else? Can we move on to the policing plan performance Q4, please? Item 6 on your agenda.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to invite Alistair to talk to this on behalf of the force, if that's okay.
That's fine.
That's right. So the papers are sort of two slide decks here, deal with the end of year position and some headlines performance wise for the policing plan are. We did see a 31% increase in the number of crimes reported by BTPA 22-23 overall, and that was pretty much in line with national trends. But there's still 1% fewer than 18-19 and 8% fewer than 19-20. As we move into this year, we see that as a trend. The main drivers for the increase in those violent offences overall won't be surprised to hear theft and passenger property, which has seen massive rise across all divisions. We have seen an increase in the number of crimes that were solved in that performance year. However, the overall volume increase in crime has meant that solve rate reduced slightly from previous years, 15% to 14%. Main threats for us last year, continuing this year, are robbery and violence, robbery offences. We saw a 35% increase year on year. You'll be aware we have operations running to deal with that. So robbery and violence have gone to beyond the force exception levels, continue to do so this year. Some of the sort of headline specifics, we've also seen within that crime increase a rise in mentioned robbery but serious violence offences across the force offences classified as actually probably half or above. The solve rate has increased by 4% in that realm. We've seen an increase in weapons in open offences, so more offensive weapons being found, but more offensive weapons being used in commission crimes. Again, the solve rate for that has increased. In relation to violence against rail staff, significant increase in reporting violence against the person, but also a jump in the solve rate as well. Some good news around antisocial behaviour and football-related offences. So although we did see a rise in the year last year, that trend line has continued to come down. And in relation to football-related offences across the network, a reduction of 10%, an increase in solve rate. Sexual offences remains a priority issue for the force, as you'll be aware within the agenda. Continuing to see an increase in reporting. We still don't think it's the true baseline of offending, and our solve rate for sexual offences rose by 2% to 60%. It's not brilliant, but in the scheme of things nationally, that's an operational achievement. Continue to see the detection solve rate rise for sexual offences within within the force. In relation to disruption on the network, we've been trending above the 90-minute handback time to 95 minutes for a year. I am pleased to say, and I just mentioned to Ron and Andy briefly, we have sort of put some fairly stringent actions in place to respond to that. We're seeing this year into year to date, as of yesterday, that figure going down to around 85. So we're making progress. Trespass continues to be the main driver. Moving to holiday period, so we saw increases last year. To expect we're just about into, I think, we look forward to plans around that. But nonetheless, we look carefully at what we did last year to achieve impact and this year. I think I'll stop there. It's a quick summary, quick run through. I think the main strategic threat for us around crime, from a harm perspective, remain violence, robbery, violence against rail staff and passengers. From sort of strategic threat, I mean, I've spoken to some rail industry colleagues recently who are concerned about the volume increases in crime, theft and passenger property. And we're very much looking to apply a crime prevention focus to that, given it is a low cost option to make impact not quite there. So this year, we're hoping to see the volume crime offences, acquisitive crime addressed through Alan's strategic crime prevention plan, hopefully as a part to that.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or points? Stuart, please.
Well, on the specific issue of crimes involving sexual harassment, there's been a doubling on these figures. As far as I can see, do you know what the indicative solve rate is for that? And the other question I've got related to that is, I mean, what is the trend? Why is it doubled? Is it better recording, or?
I mean, I'll ask Charlie to come in on the sort of solve rates on it. So we at BTPA record more offences of that nature. We have a wider sort of recording field for harassment and sexual offending, USB unwanted sexual behaviour. So we tend to capture more through our recording than any other force. We've had an increase, as you know, in the sort of accessibility to report, so online, through Growing Guardian app and various other means. So we put it front and centre of our focus around confidence for violence against women and girls. So we are getting that increased reporting. We had a conversation yesterday at the performance board to look at what our overall solve rate for sexual offences would be if we followed everything that Home Office does, which is quite limited. We'd be significantly higher, but we think establishing our baseline of behaviour on train to run, but this is the way to go.
And just, if I may, just follow up on that one. Just so I'm aware, solve rate is arrest, charge, and conviction.
It's not necessarily conviction, no.
Okay.
A judicial outcome, disposal or some other method of disposal. Our rate of serious sexual assault outcome rate is the highest in the country. So in terms of the serious end of that spectrum of crime, we are doing well, but we are doing well in context of not great performance nationally. Less than 1 in 5 rape and serious sexual offences detected nationally. From a reporting and recording perspective, as the Deputy has said, we know that sexual offences and unwanted sexual behaviour are underreported nationally. We took a conscious decision to encourage and increase the opportunity for all types of sexual offences being reported, if only to develop our intelligence, but also get a better understanding of the level of underinvestment that police has consistently put into this area. Somewhere in the region of only 1 in 10 crimes are reported. We have opened for much broader for Home Office forces, and we are seeing the sorts of antisocial behaviour that would be classified as perhaps public order offence in other forces. We are recording it as unwanted sexual behaviour, and that is largely to ensure that we have a proper handle on what's happening on our network. And I have to say, I'm shocked on a daily basis by the number of offences that are reported to us where people feel it's appropriate or it's okay effectively to sort of touch people without consent, to engage them in very sexually provocative conversation. And I just think we need to know that if we're then going to deploy in the right places. So I guess that's why we're seeing the level which we've seen, and I welcome that.
That's helpful, thank you. One last thing, if I may. Very striking figure, the drop in crisis interventions on vulnerable people. I just wonder what was behind that. That is 40% reduction. But that seems to be going against a national trend, which is upwards in that category.
I mean, Charlie's as the lead. My take on that still would be very much around as demand rises elsewhere within force, in business, whether it's force and service, crime reporting as a whole, our ability to be proactive is impacted by that. I suspect that's one area. We've seen that historically. So, Charlie, I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's directly linked to railway usage. So, you know, it's taken time for the network to get back to normal operating capacity. As a consequence, we've not seen as many presentations, consequently not as many opportunities for intervention. The suicide rate, which is obviously the next stage of that type of behaviour, remains relatively stable. Whilst we've seen some increases over the last couple of weeks, broadly speaking, it is in parallel with where we were in previous years. So I would expect that number to increase as the network returns to normal, albeit we are getting there slowly, but for sure.
Can I just add one point, Flip, to your point around sexual offending? So we are seeing a decrease in the number of victims, female victims, that are dropping out, i.e. not supporting our investigations and prosecutions. So a lot of the time we report a crime, as we head towards a charge or judicial outcome trial, we do have a lot of individuals who decide not to support it. We're seeing that trend line go down. So the ability to support BTP in our prosecutions is beginning to come up. So more prosecutions are supported by victims, which may tend to suggest some more confidence in the way that we're approaching this.
Is that because you've got an allocated officer to that victim and they stay with them?
So I think we have to look at it into the confidence of women in policing. So I mean, obviously after the murder of Sarah Everard and with David Carrick as a repeat rapist, serial rapist, I think, it's very clear that the confidence of women, which we've always taken for granted in policing certainly over decades that I've been policing, has plummeted. And not only that, if you look at the judicial outcome rate, or if you do engage with the system as a female victim of sexual offending on you, the outcome rate is so low that your confidence in the entirety of the process is undermined. I mean, the chances of the duration lasting for somebody who's a victim of rape or a serious sexual offence and getting an outcome, the outcome that you're looking for is really low. And so I think that, we can badge it however we want. I think the harsh reality is that, a cohort of the public that we have always taken for granted at the moment, they question the confidence in the system and whether they all arguably want to be in that system. And, it was really interesting. Somebody I know the other day was observing something in court, and, a victim of rape has to retell their story probably upwards of 6 to 7 times, and the suspect gives a pre-prepared statement with a lawyer. The imbalance is significant. And I think there is a much broader strategic issue. And I think as a force would say that a lot of our social media engagement, the reason we've pushed on some of our social media channels, such as Instagram, we know it's got a much higher engagement rate with women, is to try and connect with people to rebuild that trust and confidence. And it's very much about them personally having confidence with us as a force, because I don't think that's necessarily replicated across policing. So, we do take a degree of satisfaction that we are seeing an increase, but it takes a lot of time in order to, keep repeatedly putting the message. You'll have seen the campaign that we've had out there in terms of calling it out. And also, it's not just about women, it's about the bystander. Everybody sat on the train at some point and felt uncomfortable and has moved rather than done something about it. So I think it's a multitude of things from a strategic perspective. I would say that Charlie's team also right from the first responder, they work really hard to try and get the trust of the victim to stay with the duration of the process. But, some crime court trials aren't being listed for 2 or 3 years. That's a long time to have something people are waiting for.
So it's, because it's very interesting to understand this, it's not sentencing guidelines, it's the overall efficacy of the criminal justice system.
I think it's the totality of the system. I mean, within that, there could be some sentencing guidelines, because if at the end of it you get, a suspended sentence for somebody who's sat there with some predatory sexual behaviour towards you, a suspended sentence doesn't feel like you've got justice as a victim. So, but some of that will be sentencing guidelines. Some of that is going to be the totality of the system and time. The longer time goes on, the harder it is for Charlie and the investigators he has working to retain the confidence of the victim.
Anybody else, any questions or points? Yeah,
Just two questions really. The theft of passenger property, is that one that doesn't include the robbery? It just includes, and Alan will know one of the greatest problems is we build trains now which don't really adequately provide for luggage, and then make announcements to say, please don't give your luggage under tension. So there's lots of work we need to do in that area, because we're kidding ourselves in a way, really. The industry needs to stand out, or people need to be wise to the sort of luggage that they bring. The Japanese people with enormous suitcases, which you see very often, just afraid of this. So, if there's anything to do to help.
On that, Andy, so we had a performance board yesterday, and we talked, so this Garrett's leading London with around it. Obviously, it doesn't feature in the control strategy, but more way we deal with it, we understand confidence to industry and confidence to passengers. We are hindered by, I'm honest with you, some of the buy-in from TOS and industry on crime prevention investment, quite frankly. Getting the balance of messaging between passenger confidence and warning is a hard one. I do get that, but I think we're at a point where we need to take a little bit of a risk on that. CCTV on trains, as you know, the coverage isn't as widespread as we'd like. The quality of it sometimes hinders our investigations as well. Our detection rate, as you know, is pretty appalling, quite frankly. But that is the volume. So crime prevention focus going forward, I think, is where we can eat into this, as long as we get the buy-in from industry to.
And I think the biggest issue with that really is that you need to warn people before they set out. So as you tell them right, they can't by then the decision is going to take. But the second one was just, it's good news in terms of handback times. I mean, that 90-minute target has been in place certainly since the 1990s. So it's well ingrained in the industry, and it's great that we've got an improving trend. Although the annual report last year, whilst it was getting better, it's still not hitting 90. The reason I really raise it is we've had two presentations at committees of the authority this year, both from passengers, which said their number one priority was disruption and running trains, and also from our funders, from the TOPS and so on. But actually, that's number one on their list as well. And sometimes, like here, it's the last thing on the sheet. It's half a sentence at the end of our annual report. So we possibly need to make sure that we keep that in focus, because we often talk a lot about other things rather than that, which is actually the priority for the people that we're intending to look after.
Anybody else? Alan?
Chair, thank you very much indeed. Yeah, I think that there are some really helpful points in terms of crime prevention around TPP, which I think would be useful to share with you at some stage. I know you're hugely focused on that. Rail crime prevention partnerships, where the industry will come to account for what it is also doing in terms of crime prevention effort. Just wanted to pick up just the point about ASB, if I could as well, Chair. It was really pleasing to see the downturn in ASB numbers. We are really conscious of the risk of underreporting. And we tomorrow have a summit with RDG members to talk around the challenge of ASB. It's hardy perennial, as you know. But also, helpfully, there is one issue around which you will always gain a level of industry buy-in, so that such that they will absolutely turn up for events to discuss that sort of challenge. It does feed into the confidence issue in terms of staff passenger surveys as well. So we're building a confidence plan around both of those things. We'll exercise some of that, test some of that. But ASB, despite fall, remains a real a priority push for network policy.
Anybody else, any points or questions? A couple from me, if I may. We don't have broken out here assaults against officers. What's the trend on those?
So I have had some work done on this, which I've sent back recently. So there is an upward trend, certainly over the last 6 months. It has gone fairly sharply up. And I'm looking now to get the drivers, just really understand what it is, whether it's alcohol driven, whether it's health at particular locations. But we are seeing that increase. Thankfully, not all of the increase is serious, and there are enough in there to get concerned. So it's something that we can trust and bring that back and circulate.
I would welcome that, please. Because I'm conscious that a surprisingly high number of officers are assaulted in the course of their duty. It's something I think we should keep an eye on because it's not acceptable. Assault of police officers. Okay, in summary then, I think the authority registers its concern in terms of the increase in serious violent offences, robbery offences and violent crimes against women, and recognises the forces attempting to tackle them. I think we also welcome the reduction you've reported in disruption timings, which I think is something that's certainly very dear to the industry and we need to keep an eye on. And I would like a little bit more highlighting, please, on the statistics and background to assaults against officers on duty, so that we try and understand that particular problem as well. And I would ask colleagues if they could tend to note this report. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Inclusion and diversity, the external scrutiny update. That's you, Kate, I think.
That's me, yes, and thanks to Karen for being here as well, because it's
Aided and abetted by Karen.
aided and abetted by Karen, and it's her work I'm describing, so I take no credit. You'll remember that the PDC commissioned a review of external scrutiny just to map out what it looked like in kind of April time last year, and reported to the full authority in September, showing a quite proliferation, a lot of external scrutiny, not necessarily in a coordinated way necessarily, and not kind of centrally managed, and perhaps missing opportunities for organisational learning. With kind of the headlines, this is non-statutory scrutiny, so we're leaving aside HMIC, NAO, GIAA. This is independent advisory groups and scrutiny panels established for the most part by the force for specific divisional, regional or topical reasons. So there's been work ongoing since then under Karen's leadership to streamline the landscape, to make it more sensible, more coherent, and to address those points around independence, diversity is a work in progress, and organisational learning. So this gives you an update on where the force have got to. They're in the process of establishing a central coordination function, which will essentially be the gatekeeper of external scrutiny. So where historically people have been able to establish a group when they wanted to, they will now come to Karen's team. They will have guidance on what already exists, what's available to them. In some circumstances, it might still be appropriate to do something new. But what we were missing, I think, previously is that there is quite a big pool of people who are there with their expertise and experience to offer to the force. That have previously been managed in kind of silos according to which panels or groups they're involved in. The central coordination function will pull that together. So there'll be a single view of all of those people, data on their demographics, their geography, their skill set, their interests, the panels they've been attached to historically, and what the kind of things that they can offer to the force for them to draw down then when it's appropriate to do so, when someone in the force or the authority wants to invite scrutiny. So it's more centrally coordinated. That central function under Karen will also help with agenda setting. They'll spot trends. They'll ensure that communication is consistent and the feedback comes to the appropriate part of our organisations. So there's previously no line of sight, probably to COG and definitely to the authority. What was being discussed, we didn't really know what people were telling us externally about the force, and we concluded that we need to do better on that. So there's been work done to establish that function. It's not new posts, it's existing people and posts, and Karen is doing the legwork to get that in place. There's been kind of an audit of the groups that were in place as well, and I think a sensible sort of stock take of what's useful, what's serving its purpose, what's run its course, what can be closed down in terms of groups, which ones could be merged, which ones need to stay. So there's been a reduction in the total number, probably about 9 or 10 groups that existed on the previous map that aren't now on the new one. Divisional IAGs will still continue to exist and will serve their functions. They operate differently across divisions for good local reasons. Some of them, so Scotland, for example, is now subsuming formally its stop and search panel into its IAG instead of trying to breathe life into a separate meeting. It's not really necessary for the amount of stop and search that happens there. That kind of sensible, pragmatic approach is being taken. So I'll leave that there. Karen can talk to any more detail if there are questions on the progress on that. For us, a significant change will be that in terms of establishing the authorities' openness, transparency to scrutiny and thinking about our public accountability, the review that happened recommended that ownership for the Strategic Independent Advisory Group should come to the authority. COGM endorsed that as well, and I hope that we can discuss that today and support that as well. It'll be owned and managed within the executive team, but hopefully members will want to and be able to engage with that. It models the Home Office and PCC approach, whereby the PCCs manage the strategic independent advisory groups on behalf of their Home Office force. And I think for us, given that we're a non-elected body, our proximity to the people who are offering their expertise and support to that group stands to be better than it has been. We haven't been as engaged as we could have and should have been, and I think that should change. So that's going to be a big change for us. It's going to take some work to do that. Hopefully people will express interest if they want to get involved in it. My paper just asked that you note the work that the force have been doing to streamline this complicated landscape, that you note the move of the ownership of the SIAG, and then we've been taking periodic reports on external scrutiny at the full authority meeting. It hadn't been escalated from PDC. My proposal is that now we are where we are with it, we delegate feedback from external scrutiny to the relevant committee as it arises, guided and managed by us in the exec. So this might be the last external scrutiny update to the full authority, but expect to see in your committee's relevant issues as the feedback comes in and the organisational learning emanates from the new model of panels and groups. That's it from me. Karen, did you want to?
No, I'm happy for any questions, though. We've covered everything that we've done so far.
Thank you very much, ladies. Any questions from colleagues around the table? Yeah, sorry.
So I think this is very welcomed, and I think particularly having a system so people can't just set up random groups that maybe people don't know about, which is I think the bane of every organisation, if you're not careful. But I've got a couple of questions. First one is when you change any process, there's a risk of disengaging people who felt empowered maybe in the past. So what are the plans to make sure that that isn't the unintended consequence? Because that would be a real shame when that's not the intention of what you're trying to do. Secondly, there's no mention of data in here, and these groups should be used really to help understand whether or not the policies, processes, procedures that you're doing internally and externally are heading down the track that you want them to head down, and to have the interventions are making progress. How are you going to build that into this? Because otherwise, you're going to have anecdotal feedback that may not be supported by evidence, and you'll get clash. So I suppose it's how do you make sure that you, as you move into a more strategic view of the world, that you build in some really robust data points. So then questions. I don't know whether you can, and if you can't, it's fine.
Shall I do the first one? So at the moment we had about 25 different external scrutiny panels and groups. We're closing some down, but really the ones that weren't operating or they didn't have membership or somebody had a good idea but never progressed it really. We will have one external scrutiny group and we'll maintain lots of contact with that group and use them for various different means. So some for lived experience, some because they're subject matter experts, but any that we're closing down, we're already communicating with them to either say thank you for all the work, would you like to remain in the larger group and be used for some of the other external scrutiny. So we're not hoping to lose anybody, it just may well move over into the bigger group and be used for something different. At the same time as that, we're going to be recruiting new members to make sure that we've got more diversity within that group as well. So I think that answers your first bit. Second, I'm not too sure on around the data question though. You're talking about the information that goes to external scrutiny.
I think it's the data that feeds in and the data that comes out, because if not, you could end up with, and it is the jar, isn't it? It's what you're reading. You get a lot of anecdotal. It can be very strong, very anecdotal sort of commentary, might not actually reflect the totality of the situation. And as I say, you don't try and fix that.
I think that's a fair challenge. My hope is that, I mean, given that there was no oversight of the agenda setting and the topics and things beforehand, I don't think we can make it any worse, but that's not to decry the really good engagement that's been going on. But yeah, we definitely need to be clear on that. We've got feedback from the HMIC as well around how we use our groups and how independent they are. We've got to think about ownership, given that we're merging people who've been on scrutiny panels and on IAGs and the different levels of vetting in terms of exposing them to information and data. But yes, we've got to think about how we balance that. What do we want to show them at the same time as inviting them to talk to us about their agenda as well and what they want to do. And it's got to be evidence-based. If we're going to change anything as a result of what they're telling us, we've got to be efficient evidence-based, haven't we? There's been a real lack of any feedback going back to those groups in any case about the inputs that they've had so far. They've remained engaged. So I'm hoping we'll be able to sift the anecdotal from the evidence-based and still hear the anecdotal and deal with it and allow it to vent. But that may be stuff that doesn't lead to the same kind of concrete change or policy shift or adjustment that the evidence-based might.
Yeah, and some of the anecdotal will be lived experience. So we want to use that group for some of the policy-based action plan and the other work as well.
Sorry, I just finished. It can add colour, but we've got to be really careful it doesn't send you on the wrong track, is all I'm saying, because if you get somebody with a particular view, it can take over and it doesn't necessarily mean that you end up doing the right thing.
Willie, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I welcome this paper. I did attend one of the meetings recently, and it was quite an eye opener in terms of I guess the lack of people that were there, and the lack of the sort of structure that was around what we're trying to achieve. So I think what we're trying to do is good. I think what would help here for me would be realistically, where would we see ourselves in 6 months, 3 months? And I think it'd be helpful to see some sort of plan which says this is what we'd like to achieve by September, October, the number of people that we would like, the restructuring of the groups, the number of meetings that we'd like, and then where would we be by the turn of the year? And just set ourselves some realistic objectives in this, because this could be a bit like turning the Titanic, I think.
Thanks, Jenna.
Yeah, I also welcome work that's done. Clearly, progress has been made, so support for all of that. I'm a little unclear on the internal governance within BTP, because the chart that we've got that says proposed structure seems to be a mixture of individual people, the group that you talked about, the individuals. I'm not quite clear about how that structure works. And second, I think building on points about, I guess, what the implementation risks. We picked up a couple here about potentially disenfranchising people and the data, but have you actually thought through the implementation risks of the proposal? There's a section in the paper that refers to risk, but we couldn't access whatever the underlying point was. So I'm really keen to encourage you to really think through all the potential implementation risks so that we actually get ourselves set up on the right foot and we consider all the potential pitfalls that we could have.
Yeah, I think in the paper, the risk that it refers to is by continuing with the current system, the current model.
Right.
So there was a risk of doing that, not having the organisational learning, not having the diversity on those panels, and that's what this new model should rectify.
But
so
there is also a potential risk of implementing this new model, so that's the bit I'm encouraging you to think through now, that we make sure we don't run into any consequences.
Yes, certainly.
Anybody else? Alan?
Thank you very much indeed for the point around anecdote versus data. So my experience of the independent advisory groups and the external scrutiny that I have been present to, and admittedly I've not been to all of those exchanges is that, you know, the data is part and parcel of those presentations. So that effectively there is an evidence base which is traded upon, which tries to mitigate some of that growth of anecdotes. But it's a risk we've got to be alive to through everything. But I actually think that the big challenge, as far as I'm concerned, from my observations, is that our lack of challenge and the lack of effective scrutiny holding us to account. After all, you know, we've got a sort of disproportionate stop search rate, as we know. I don't hear a huge amount in terms of the external scrutiny challenges around that. It's largely the challenges that we bring up in our own mind. So I'm hopeful, rather than a growth of anecdotes, there is a growth of challenge, which is quite effective to the world. Because that is exactly what I think we need to aspire to.
Well, you share the data. Ask them to consider why that might be the case.
And we have traditionally been hugely transparent about the data. It's really important. Anecdotal not goes very far.
Thank you. Anyone else? Nick?
It is a question rather than a comment, and forgive the ignorance behind the question, but do any of these existing groups or proposed groups actually get down to looking at case files?
So others may comment on case files, but I do know that some of the groups will look at body-worn video, for example. So the Notting Hill Carnival, there was a lifetime standing external scrutiny group which examined every instance of body-worn video, examined the grounds and rationale for each of the searches, and commented and provided some professional.
Because that, all that, to come back up, I mean, that's reassuring. But from a previous life, I was involved in hate crime scrutiny panels, where you randomly picked a number of completed cases. This was in the CPS. We had policing reports as well. We basically sat down and community and said, we can comment on them. You know, have we missed a trick here? What could we have done to keep the victim on board? Why did we lose the victim? You know, what happened? And that's really powerful, because although it's not the sort of data, big picture data that Fiona's talking about, it gives you something that bridges the gap between anecdote and numbers. And you can say, well, and I don't know whether you do it, and if you don't, recommend it, because it's something really powerful about explaining it. And just picking up on the point that Lucy made about, you know, trust amongst women. We found it building trust amongst minority communities when they actually saw the complaints were taken seriously and prosecuted. And so if there's a theme that you're concerned about, by focusing on a few completed cases, even unsuccessful ones, you can expose the way we work to the wider public, and hopefully that builds some trust back.
These points for everybody else, please.
Just on that one with Nick as well, we do have a number of panels that look at hate crime, rape and sexual assault, and so it does definitely look at some crime files. I'm not too sure if it's the cradle to grave type end of case to look back at learning from that, but there's certainly some pinch points in that they do look at some of those panels.
Because I mean, you know, I'm going back a few years, but the two things absolutely mirror what Lucy said about cases. You know, one is two themes I remember was how long has it taken to get from start to finish? So nothing's changed there. In fact, it's got worse. So I was a frontline practitioner. And the second one is, why have I been through all this pain and got such a crap sentence at the end of it? And the answer to that often is partly delay, because the person who's been sentenced 3 years after some appalling behaviour is now presenting as a model citizen, and therefore gets a lighter sentence. But those are the two themes that came out. But it was good to have those debates, because you could then come back to people and say, but if you hadn't reported it, you wouldn't have even got that far.
Okay, anybody else?
So I really welcome this. It's great to see. I suppose my concern is probably a bit more nebulous, and that is about, as we move forward to this, is ensuring and bringing absolutely right direction. I suppose for me, it is how do we ensure that in that true diversity, that actually people who tend not to engage in these sort of panels get access to them and are able to be. So how do we encourage more, I want to use the word ordinary, but you know what I mean. So where people who do not do this kind of thing normally come in, and particularly, you know, where we have got the disproportionality on stop and search and various things like that. How do we ensure that we're getting a balance of views coming forward on that panel? Health suffer the same thing. The very people you want to reach, the very people who don't want to engage. And so, you know, it's a challenge.
Yeah, it definitely is. B Division already have an external scrutiny coordinator, Marco Di Paolo, and he's out regularly engaging with local communities, charity, third sector, community groups, and he's quite easily, really, it feels, engaging with people and bringing them in to recruit them onto the IAG. So we just need to replicate that type of offer throughout the force.
I think there's a bit about being brave as well about how we operate, because we've kept scrutiny panels and IAGs quite separate and quite different in terms of their recruitment and the way that people are vetted and what they're used for. I think if we want to access a more diverse group, we've got to accept that some people are going to have backgrounds where they might have been involved with the police and we might put them out of normal vetting, but nevertheless we still want to hear them. So how do we do that? How do we manage that safely and you know, keep everyone on the right track? But we've talked about how we.
Yeah, we'll have one group, some will be vetted and some not vetted. So some will have access to some particular data and information and others may not do. But we do want those non-vetted ones as well.
And they wouldn't be excluded from the debate anymore. I think historically they would have been because they weren't meeting that criteria, whereas I think we need to be a bit more flexible on that.
I'm conscious of time, ladies and gentlemen. Anybody, any last comments?
A very quick point. We've just been through a round of reviewing terms of reference for our committees. If this is something they're going to take on, we need to get that in and not wait a year to update.
Yeah, and also, this, Chair, if I may, members' handbook, obviously we're taking new people on. This is quite a complex area for new folk, but just looking maybe at the committee structure, this is a whole new architecture of scrutiny. If this could be incorporated into the members' handbook, it's a housekeeping issue because it is quite a complex area.
Okay, thank you everybody for your questions. I think the clear message coming out, as we discussed yesterday, Kate, is the whole issue process around this so that we get meaningful data so that the authority and the committees can take appropriate action on the basis of what they're hearing. Could you please also arrange as soon as possible for me to meet the chair of the Strategic Independent Advisory Group so that we can have a conversation. I can find out from the chair what their requirements and desires are in terms of doing their job, which is very important. Thank you very much. Can we note and approve that? I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add on your paper, which is at the back of that, Alan. Is there?
No, it's entirely complementary to that paper, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Highlight of the day now, annual reports and accounts, Ravilla.
Thank you. So I just want to start with lots of feedback on the annual report and accounts. Yeah. The auditor's feedback in the annual report of accounts was that they were of a good standard when they were received, which is a credit to Harriet Andrews' team, who's not, she's on the call. She's on the call. So Harriet Andrews is our Deputy Director of Financial Control, and it is a credit to her team, especially since she's had some turnover from last year. The audit, unfortunately, is still ongoing. We were supposed to have our last audit meeting yesterday. That was moved from yesterday to this afternoon. We're hoping this afternoon they will let us know they've completed the testing and looking material hopefully has come up. We brought the annual report account to Eric last week, who gave us some feedback around adding some wording in the risk area of the governance statements. And we also need to look at the HMIC paragraphs as well, given the different publication dates between the HMIC reports and the annual report on accounts. There were a couple of issues that we brought up at ARIC on technical issues, which given that Harriet's on, she might want to talk through. So one of them was around IFRS 16 issue that we discovered during the year, and the second one was a provision that we discovered after the financial year that we're putting as adjustments in the accounts. I don't know, Harriet, if you want to talk through those.
Yeah, so with regards to IFRS 16, this is a relatively new accounting standard regarding leases. Having found an issue or a miscalculation on the Camden FHQ lease, having reviewed the wrong lease, we did a full reassessment of all of our leases to make sure that we'd accounted for it correctly, and that our scoping, deciding whether something's in or out of scope for IFRS 16 was consistent and simple. So following that work, we made an adjustment in the accounts around January time to make sure that the accounting was correct, and we talked that through with the auditors quite heavily. They are content with the treatment. An element of the adjustment does relate to previous years. However, the impact was not material enough to make a prior year adjustment to the accounts, and the audit team are content with that decision. The other area, we made a late provision to the accounts in period 14 with regards to the Oval 4 and Stockwell 6 case. We received a number of claim letters from individuals linked to those two cases. Because the probability of settlement is quite high, we are required to recognise a liability in the prior year in 22-23 results. We've talked this through with the auditors, and they are content with that treatment. Thank you.
I mean, on Monday, we did a walkthrough of the accounts with members when we went through what the content of each section of the account should be. Since Monday, we have actually found another adjustment, and it was Harriet's team that found this adjustment that needs to be made. I can give some details, and Harriet can jump in if she wants. So the amount is 467,000, which is below the materiality threshold, but it's above what the auditors call a trivial threshold, which means that they would, if we didn't adjust for it, they will put it in their audit completion report, the audit conclusion. So this 467,000 was a liability that we've had sitting since 2016. It relates to the officer pension scheme deficits repayment recovery plan. So the valuation of the officer scheme for 31st December 2012, there was a deficit, which meant that we agreed a recovery plan that began in 2014. We actually paid off that in full in 2016, and this has been, since this week, that's been agreed with the counterparty, Railpen, that we have actually paid that off in full in 2016. However, a creditor remained on our balance sheet of 467,000 since 2016 that we just investigated now, and because we've agreed with the counterparty that we don't owe them that money, we should therefore adjust for it and remove the liability. In terms of, and I think it is actually quite important that we think about what we do in the future around this and what controls we can put in around bank reconciliations, etc., balance sheet reconciliations, especially as we currently have a deficit recovery plan for the staff pension scheme in 2019, and we obviously don't want to be in that position again. We want to make sure that we fully reconcile with our counterparty that we've paid off that deficit. So I know that Harriet's been thinking about some extra controls to put in place around reconciliations, etc. I was going to suggest that we bring a paper to an ARIC with those suggested controls, but if Harriet's here, I'm sure she's done a lot of thinking as well.
Yes, I've already spoken to Steph about it. I think pensions is very complicated because we have a number of different sections with different rules and obviously different deficit levels. So I've spoken to Steph about us needing to do a full walkthrough of how we do balance sheet reconciliations for our pension schemes and ensure that this doesn't happen again. So we will document a clear process and bring a paper to our ARIC and then also to the audit committee on how we prevent this happening going forward. I think in terms of the adjustment, whilst for the audit team it's relatively small, it's the right thing to do to make this adjustment in the current financial statements rather than 23-24.
Thank you. Anything else?
And no other points.
Any points or questions from colleagues? Yes,
I'll say that the third time I've been at the pleasure of going through this, various committees. I would just comment that I thought the GIA reports that we've had this year, the audit reports, were particularly good, readable, intelligible, and better than I've seen before. So the suite that we have this year, I think, really good. On the external audit, I know we don't appoint KPMG, that's the NAO, but they're getting paid quite a lot of money, and they haven't really met timescales, quality, and they weren't terribly impressive in our review the other day. So I was suggesting that we should provide some feedback to NAO, maybe the team they put on it, but we're still paying good money for it. And lastly, just this new point that's come up. How is it that, without being critical, we or the auditors haven't spotted this for the last sort of 6 years? Because in my experience, auditors spend most of their time scrutinising the balance sheet to find out where I've hidden stuff in past lives, and this just seems like quite a big number to have just stood out. Again, not criticism, I just it's quite puzzled really. It's a balance sheet item.
I mean, I'll probably let Harriet answer the kind of buzz, but on the auditors, I used to be an auditor, and it's you go for materiality. That's the main thing with all them. Given that this wasn't material, that's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
However, I am surprised that they didn't think about it because of the length of time.
Yeah.
So, because normally you'd go materiality, but you would also think about the kind of aging as well. So I'm not quite sure why the auditors didn't pick it up. I don't know about Harriet.
I refer you to my earlier point about us paying auditors quite a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for the auditors. They obviously can't review 100% of the transactions. It may have been that compared to, say, the level of current pension contributions we pay, which are, you know, a number of millions, they tested that rather than looking at what they would consider. In terms of us not identifying it, there was a misunderstanding on what it related to. I think there was an assumption that it was a long-term liability that we needed to maintain because it referred to a deficit. As soon as it was escalated to me, I did look into the detail. It took quite a while because obviously it relates to a number of years back, and dealt with it as soon as I could. But it's the like complicated pension balance sheet that I need to get my team really focused on, and for us to give assurance to staff.
I think you guys have done a great job, and you know you can put this down to prudence, so that's fine. It's really, you know, auditors may be looking at pension contributions, but they spend a lot of time looking at balance sheets. That was my puzzle. Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Nick?
I just want to sort of up the ante a bit on Andy's comment about auditors, because, you know, as authority members and indeed as BTP staff, we put a lot of effort into doing things in a timely and professional manner. So the team have put a lot of effort into this, you know, I applaud them for it. That's leading to ARAC, and then from ARAC to a Monday morning meeting. Monday morning to be told, well, the auditors haven't finished yet. To me, it's just unprofessional and unacceptable. And to then hear Rebecca, and you know, you have my sympathy, be told, well, the meeting we were going to have isn't actually going to happen until after the authority meeting. Again, is unprofessional and unacceptable. And I think we should go a bit beyond a little bit of friendly feedback to NAO. I personally feel the authority should be expressing its displeasure.
Yeah, well, we did note these points at the audit committee, and I did challenge the NAO representative who quickly sidestepped it onto KPMG who actually do the audit, because we didn't get a particularly satisfactory response. What I would know is that there has been a complete turnover of people both in the NAO and in KPMG this year, and within the authority. So the only constant really has been Harriet and BTP. So in some regards, it's quite remarkable that we've had such a high quality set of accounts at all, which is a credit to the team here. I equally don't think we've got had a particular service in KPMG, and the timeliness is particularly irritating because it puts pressure on the team at the last minute. And we did. So we did note that, and I think some sort of formal letter to discuss outside how we codify that, some sort of letter back to NAO.
But if I just come up very quickly, that you know the situation that you were dealing with last week at ARAC has actually been compounded and worse. And if we were to say as an authority or as the force, well, actually, head of finance has left. We've had a maternity cover, deputy chief exec and chief finance officer. We've had a change of personnel, and as a result of that, our accounts are crap.
It did take a bit more attention, yeah.
We wouldn't get away with that, so why should they?
I don't think Kenna's plaudits for Rubila were implicit, they were explicit, weren't they? But I just wanted to point that one up, that the number of people, we did have this conversation, the number of key people who have changed since last September, both at the NAO and KPMG and in our roles. Harriet has kept us all on the straight and narrow, but Rubila's done a lot, so I wanted to put my thanks on the record. Just a little bit of history to this really. So Sarah had exactly the same concerns about KPMG the last 2 or 3 years. Sarah did raise with NAO. So I think when we do make these formal representations, which I'm taking a tone of reading we all want to do, I want to put it in a context that we've made them before. Actually the NAO have changed because they have to. Because every 7 years, it's unhealthy to have the same people on your account all the time, so they had to. I don't know whether KPMG changed because of Sarah's pressure. It's quite possible they did. But either way, it hasn't in the first year resulted in the improvements we want to see. So I feel we should make this representation, but we just put a slightly broader context. This is not a one-off. Did you do NAO contract out 20%?
20%.
All of their audits. So this is their business model that they use, but we ought to feel free in saying we're not finding it particularly impressive.
At least the poor model of service is consistent. Everybody else, yes.
Yeah, so I would endorse that position. If this was, it's this public money that's being spent, isn't it? If this was in our own domestic world, we wouldn't go back to the same place twice, and we certainly probably wouldn't be paying the bill in full. And I think it's I'm keen to know, have they delivered on the contract? If they haven't delivered on the contract, certainly we as a force are very clear in exercising contractual breaches and some of the penalty clauses that are associated with them. It's a significant thing not to have delivered in advance of the full authority meeting, and I think we should be, under the wise counsel of Kenna, I think we should be really clear about what we're going to do about that. And really I would like to take the opportunity to thank Harriet and their team. Harriet's work and the team's work, previously under Tracy's leadership and now under Steph's leadership, who's in week 2, but it gives us a lot of confidence as a chief officer team in terms of the grip that she has. So it's just minutes to note my thanks.
Okay. Anybody else?
Elsewhere in the annual report, there's a comment about new ways of working, and I can't find their reference here, but there's a comment that since 2022, our people, I think it says something like a substantial number of them feel that they are able to work in the way they wish to or something. I just want to make sure we've got evidence for that it is due to new ways of working. Can't find the reference, but it's specifically mentioned in the annual report, so we just need to make sure we can evidence that is what's true. I think that was in the governance statement. I know something that we said last year as well. And the evidence was from the staff survey results. Right, there's something else here, but the staff survey results.
Right, I think it's in the preamble or somewhere.
Okay.
Wherever. And then in the governance statement, I just wanted to note that Hugh thinks in his report, but the annual audit opinion was a moderate, slightly better moderate than last year, slightly up, which I think is right direction. Clearly, like to move it further.
Okay, anybody else before we move on? Conscious of time. Can I just make a couple of points before we get to the meat of this one? First of all, it is fair to say for the record that we have crawled over these documents and accounts on several occasions leading up to this day's debate, and members are well versed with the issues and points. Secondly, it's quite clear that members are not satisfied with KPMG's performance, and I would welcome their advice on how best we tackle that particular issue so that we hopefully get a better service next year from whomsoever. And thirdly, what you're being asked to do today, colleagues, is to approve the annual report and accounts and to delegate to the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee any further non-material changes which may occur. Are we content so to do? Thank you very much, Dave. And finally, I will say this to both the authority and force teams in terms of preparing these accounts. I know it's a considerable amount of hard work And I just want, on behalf of my colleagues, to thank you all for the effort you put into this. It's been a good result, so thank you very much to all of you. BTP Conduct Amendment Regulations 2023. Stephanie.
Thank you. So for this item, we're seeking approval from the authority to introduce amendment regulations, effectively updating the current BTP Conduct Regulations 2020, enabling us to hold accelerated misconduct hearings for former officers where applicable. I think it's worthy of note that this is just one of a number of work streams that the BTPA have been exploring with effectiveness and efficiency of our current systems and practices in mind. These are actually subject of discussion by the People and Culture Committee, and whilst other areas of change also received endorsement, I'll just shout out a couple: BTP representational panels and inclusion BTP on the barred list. They remain areas of interest, but we concluded within the BTPA that it was appropriate to await the publication of the Home Office dismissals review, which I think we believe to be next month. Others might know more than me, which could lead to more significant change within the conduct arena and thus requiring more substantial revisions to the regulations. With regards to these changes, it's a fairly minor change, which brings BTP largely in line with the adopted position by Home Office forces. It just felt that it was appropriate to proceed without delay. As set out within the paper, the amendment regs have been shared with the staff associations through formal consultation process and have received support from the representatives of these groups. I'll just mention paragraph 2.2, that we have a formal agreement in place with the Independent Office for Police Conduct to bring regulations related to complaints and conduct, and we've been in discussion with them with a view to that agreement being updated. So just bringing us to the final point, which is seeking final approval now from the authority before the amendments can become effective.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. Any comments, questions, points? Yes.
I mean, I am disappointed with part of some of the other materials and are waiting for the Home Office position. I mean, we had a discussion yesterday with the Home Office, but I think there are some other areas that we should have pressed on with, noting that there is not necessarily an agreed position amongst all members and with the force and some members, but I think it is disappointing that we haven't progressed a couple of issues. And certainly, I think there's a lot of interest within our own department who are really keen to support us in this area and move forward with the proposals that we put in the recommendation to the Home Office. I know that there is a very high level of support that we move forward with those. So whilst I do welcome the change, I do think there is a danger that we're slowing still some of the processes down, as opposed to being trailblazers in this area.
Have we any update? I noticed you said you weren't sure what the Home Office is doing in terms of report publication date. Have we any update from anybody?
I think yesterday they gave me and Lucy the strongest hint I've heard yet that it will be before the summer recess. As it,
3 weeks.
3 weeks, but it's with ministers and they're not in control of their ministers.
And I think because it's overseeing sort of the implementation across 43 forces, our ability to be a trailblazer, which I would say certainly with my meeting with the Secretary of State last week, is really key that we're in this space and we're owning, the progress in this space. And he sees a real strong opportunity for us to be a leading light and trailblaze, because some of it is within the gift of the authority and Secretary of State to set the tone.
Okay. Any other comments or points on this one?
I think it would be useful, and sorry, Lucy, if I was to see what the other recommendations were that I was not adopting from my perspective, so then we can make an informed view.
Can I ask that somebody prepare us, please, a short paper outlining precisely those points, and we put it on BI for members to look at, so that members are informed as to exactly what the position is, and then perhaps some recommendation about how we may proceed with this, conscious that the Home Office review is supposed to be published before the summer recess, but you know how these things go. Bev, sorry.
So I think I could speak on behalf of the People and Culture Committee that we support this. At the moment, we're moving forward on what we can move forward without legislation change, I understand. If that's not the case, you know, we perhaps do need to have that set out for us so we can very see it. And my understanding on the barring is we have access to the Home Office barring list, so we can check before we employ. It's the other way around, that you know, if we dismiss and bar someone, then they don't go on the Home Office barring list. So my view is, I think Lucy's absolutely right. You know, we should be pressing very hard for that legislation change to happen in support of our Home Office colleagues, actually, because, you know, they don't have access to our list.
Would it need legislative change?
My understanding from talking to Nick, it would.
It's ridiculous.
I agree. So we're all in the same space on this one. It's just.
So there was I think it's fair to say, Hugh, dive in to support me on this, but we took a strong position on this with the Home Office yesterday, and we were refreshingly really strongly supported by Phil Luxford, who's now moved in to CNC. I think there was a sort of a position almost, well, you know, if somebody's got a conviction for a sexual offence, then we wouldn't employ somebody with a conviction. You know, the reality is some people we are dismissing for sexual offences do not get over the threshold to be dealt with from a prosecution perspective. The CPS are not prosecuting these individuals. So there is a real risk that somebody who has been dismissed from CNC, MDP or ourselves for sexual misconduct, inappropriate behaviour, inappropriate language, actually does not get picked up because they're not on the barred list. So I think we made that quite strongly yesterday, didn't we, Hugh? There are still some other issues which I think were discussed at People and Culture Committee that we could still proceed with. You know, the one that stands out, of course, is police staff on panels. You know, certainly the discussions I've had in the department, they're keen to see that pushed forward by the authority. So I think that we just need to unpick some of these, and certainly from my perspective, it would be good to know, you know, are members opposed, because for us that feels like it's a real challenge, and we do want to press forward on that and some other issues which I think have just been staked to one side.
Well, can we get that summarised in a paper so that members can see?
I think what a question for today is just because we had this discussion with the exec, so there's a really simple change to the regulation, really simple, that we can make now and actually have in place by the beginning of next month, sort of. Or we can wait. And you know, we had from the Home Office system, there's a whole load of things they might do. Frankly, that review of dismissals was broader than I was thinking it was going to be. So that will slow us down. We'll have to work through the ball one by one. That's a choice. We could wait, not implement this now, and then come back in the autumn with something which will still be faster than the Home Office because they're going to.
I mean, I'm not advocating that we push this into the long grass. What I'm saying is I think some of the other stuff needs to be sped up and brought forward to the authority, irrespective of the Home Office review. I mean, we were very clear yesterday, Hugh, that we don't want to go off on a tangent on our own, but there are some stuff that we know they will get there, but we can get there quicker.
Yeah. Well, let's have that summarised so we can take a view, Nick.
I mean, it seems to me that there are three factors at play, three things at play. One is the proposal that's before the authority today. My view is that we should crack on with it. It's not contentious. You know, Stephanie and Lucy have done the work to prepare the regulations. We can have that in place. We know from our consultation with the Federation they're supportive. So, you know, there's no good reason to press the pause button on that. We should do that today. Second is to consider as a matter of priority the changes that we haven't yet taken forward. But I would say the third thing is the dismissals review, and that's either going to be published in the next month or it isn't. If it isn't, it's going to go into the long grass till September, October time. And then we have to make decisions about other changes we might want to take because we can't wait forever. But equally, if the dismissal review comes out next week, I think the report next month, I think we have a much more informed debate at the Culture Committee if we know what the direction of travel is
And then on a case by case basis, you say, right, we want to diverge from the Home Office forces for this reason. Is that a valid reason or not? And I have little doubt that what you were told yesterday is that this was you won't the final version, because we've got, forgive me for sounding cynical, but this was going out of it. So to me, it's crack on with what we've got in our control today. Don't take our foot off the gas on other proposed changes. Don't. Let's be mindful of the fact that this review should be out of due and should inform our discussion.
Thank you, Lucy.
Just final point really on it. So obviously it is a matter for the authority to discuss and to agree with BTP, but we've also got to negotiate all of this with the Federation and with the Superintendents Association. And I think to try and do that ahead of getting the dismissals review would have been very, very difficult, because we know that they favour parity with Home Office forces. So that was another rationale for why we've been waiting for the dismissals review, which was originally during May as well to come, because we need to be able to have those conversations. They will be much easier if the Home Office has said that they're doing it. Appreciate that's not trailblazing.
Well, it's not reform, is it?
Practicality.
Yeah, I mean, I understand your reflection on it, but I just think if we want to make the reform be the trailblazers and have the change, you know, I mean, I think, you know, the Superintendents Association and the Federation are supportive of the reform. You know, they recognise that the majority of their members are reflecting our values and are reflecting the professional standards that they ask for. So, you know, they're, in effect, I would say, their pride as as individual organisations of the AFCAB ruling, you know, they share the same pride that we all share, that we took ourselves out of our comfort zone and we did something different. I think you may well be right, but I think that's the comfort zone, and I think we're asking for a little bit more courage in this space.
Okay, can I therefore suggest that we approve what's before us today, and could we ask please that a paper is prepared to outline for us where some of these other issues are and what can be done about them in the medium term, so that members are fully informed. Thank you. Good, thank you very much. Board effectiveness. That's now you, Lucy. I'll keep switching to the two.
So board effectiveness is obviously an area that Stephanie and I have invested in quite heavily during our time at BTPA. We know governance can be quite dry, but at the same time, you know, when processes are efficient and effective, they add value and act as an enabler and ensure appropriate checks and balances to make sure that all our goals are achieved and achieved in the right timelines. So conversely, obviously, when processes and governance are unclear or incoherent, it can act as a brake and lead to inefficiency and frustration. So that's why we've always put so much time and effort into making effectiveness a continuous journey. I think for us, the last 2 years have had a strong focus on building and consolidating healthy relationships across BTP and BTPA to ensure we support each other towards what is our common goal of ensuring efficient and effective policing for the railways. And focus over the last year has included bringing in Deloitte, as mentioned earlier, to provide an independent review to help us to progress further on that journey. And the Deloitte review, which reported in September last year, together with the B, which was conducted by the executive, resulted in quite a significant action plan that we've been working to progress. So as such, a decision was taken to focus on the implementation and embedding of the changes rather than to do a further review for the time being. And detailed progress on is reported at Annex A, but just to give you a flavour of some of the highlights, we've got the modernisation of financial governance that we're due to discuss later when we talk about the code changes, which is looking at good governance, trust and empowerment. We've had more informal time between BTP and BTPA to be able to discuss strategic matters together, and we've developed the BTPA goals and then the priorities that sit underneath those to really help to drive BTPA's agenda. And we've provided you with an updated scorecard that's attached as Annex B. We've also had a significant focus on member engagement outside of the formal committee structures. I think it is still a work in progress, but it's something that we're really keen to progress. I think that the key message coming out of all the recent effectiveness work has been the need to improve alignment between BTPA and BTP. And we've applied significant effort in the past to improving BTPA governance. We've only really ever looked at this top layer. There hasn't been a piece of work that has looked across the full governance system as what is looked at in force and what's looked at the authority. And it feels like now is a really opportune time with the improved relationship with the greater majority that's there to look across all the governance and how things move through the system, because there should be significant opportunities to streamline governance and improve assurance by mapping our oversight across everything rather than just focusing at the authority level. So this will be the first time such an exercise is to be attempted, because an agreement it's going to need careful planning and willing participants to do it. So we're proposing that relevant BTPA and BTP staff work together to develop a framework to come back in December of how that can be delivered in 2024.
Is that your Parthian shot for your successor? Thanks very much indeed, Lucy. Any comments, questions, or points from colleagues? Yes, Steph.
Just to add, I think it's a really sensible approach to it, doing it across both organisations. Just we really need to put a fire up there, because these things can just move on and move on and move on. And I think we've edged closer and closer to good governance, but there's some common sense things I think your predecessor.
Thanks, Steph. Anybody else? I would add one other thing in terms of this ongoing work, and it is this. We are about to absorb maybe up to 7 new members of the authority, and that will be a dynamic change which will need careful management. And so when this further work that you've described, Lucy, needs to be done, it needs to take into account, once we know the cadence and timings of new members joining the authority and what we're going to look like going forward into 2024. So it is an issue that we need to take note of. But apart from that, I would like to say to you both, it's a stonking and continuing bit of work which has been very useful, very helpful, and I particularly welcome, as indeed Steph has, the notion of looking at this jointly, because I think it's well overdue, and I think it will be an important several piece of work. Anybody else any comments before we approve this? Are we content to approve? Yes. Thank you very much. Code of Governance refresh, item 11.
That's me, thank you.
Back to you, Stephanie. It's like tennis, this.
So refresh of the Code of Governance is typically undertaken annually, usually in the June authority meeting. This year we are seeking to make a number of administrative changes, which I propose to go through each in turn before inviting members to approve, and then I'll hand over to Rebecca to the more interesting elements. The first approval that we're seeking is the committee terms of reference for performance and delivery, audit and risk, people and culture committee, as set out within paragraph 3 and appendix 1. These have been discussed at their corresponding committees, so I wasn't proposing to rehearse these. I've made a note of Andy's point earlier that we might want to revisit how external scrutiny features within these terms of reference. So I'll pause there.
Anyone, any questions or points? These are not insignificant changes.
Quite sensible.
Sorry.
Seem quite sensible.
Yeah, and I would also pick up the point that was made earlier about the strategic independent advisory group and the place that fits now into this panoply of committees and structures, and will need some further thought, I think. But it's part of the evolution of the Code. In the meantime, there's a whole raft of changes and amendments. Are we content to approve them? Thank you very much.
I'll then move on to a couple of sort of administrative points that are really raised for accuracy as set out within the code. So second point is we are asking the authority to approve the proposal that the Chief Constable nominates a post holder to fulfil the functions of the Director of Finance and Commercial Services where referenced in the code. This amendment takes into account the recent departure of the previous post holder that holds that title, and the Chief Officer role with financial responsibility takes a slightly different shape, so it's just an accuracy.
Are we happy with that?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And then the next point really is to seek approval to include the reference to the Code of Ethics, taking into account the amendments to the policing protocol, which is currently set out in the code. Essentially bring this up to date. I'll pause there.
Right. So you'll now be confused by the 7 standards of public life and the Code of Ethics. So you'll be the best behaved people in the world if you comply with all of these things. Any comments or questions on what Steph's just said?
I was just, I mean, I don't know whether everybody knows about the policing protocol and its status, but the policing protocol is a document which the Home Office owns, which describes the relationship between PCCs, Chief Constables and the Home Office. It has just been updated. I think it's coming to them. Yes, we don't follow it because we're not PCCs, but we always try and import the correct elements. So we saw it come out last week and thought we'd grab the chance to import the actually own development change to us, which is the benefits of code of ethics. And the others were around the kind of financial relationships with PCCs that we felt were not relevant. So, I mean, that is us in practice adhering to a Home Office framework, but using our unique statutory status to. As we should use the bit. Just underline it for you. I don't think it's difficult. I just wanted to underline that. Where it came from.
Well content. Thank you very much. So the changes are approved.
So the fourth point is we're seeking support to the proposed approach to be taken towards the working groups that form part of our existing structure. These are reviewed annually as part of the board effectiveness evaluation activity. And the key points that I would draw out for your benefit is that we are proposing that the strategy working group is discontinued and reactivated with a fresh terms of reference supporting the development of the next strategic plan. Also that the innovation transformation working group is discontinued, having never met, and much of its proposed remit has been met as part of the strategy and planning terms of reference.
Yes, that's fine.
So finally, I'll just draw your attention to Appendix 2, referred to as Annexes 4, 6, 7. For those that have got board intelligence pack, so we're looking at pages 184 to 222, and I just want to express thanks to Revealer, who has got us into a position where we're presenting a wholesale replacement of the version of the annexes based on the Deloitte recommendations. And on that note, I'll just hand over to Revealer to elaborate further.
So these recommendations for changes came out of the Deloitte work, and we had a workshop last November where we discussed some of these changes. So the annexes cover Annex 4 financial management. Annex 6 is now called principles for engagement, but previously it was accounting officer SLAs, and Annex 7 is the financial delegations. So, I mean, I wasn't here pre the Deloitte work, but from my understanding, there was quite a lot in these annexes which were kind of overly burdensome, overly detailed. A lot of the feedback from the stakeholders was that it was quite hard to kind of read and understand because there was so much detail in there. So Deloitte recommended some changes. We went through those. I went through those changes with the Deputy Director Decision Support, Richard, who's on the call, and the Deputy Director Financial Control, Harriet, who was on the call before. And we agreed kind of most of those changes did make sense, the simplification, etc. On Annex 4 financial management, it's very much taking the different kind of areas of financial management and just making it simpler as to who has the authority and what the responsibilities are of the various officers, Chief Executive, Chief Constable, etc. It's a simplification, and it avoids a lot of the work that Deloitte did was around just as well as simplification, but avoiding duplication with other areas. Annex 6 previously had been very long, and it was a very detailed. We will provide you this on this date. You will give us a look back after 3 working days. It was quite a detailed step-by-step process. Given the much better working relationship with the BTP and BTPA now, and we want to be open, transparent, and just kind of professionalism on both sides, it was deemed that that level of detail was no longer necessary. So we've simplified that quite a lot, and it also goes into the detail of services that BTP provides on behalf of BTPA, such as payroll, etc. Annex 7 scheme of financial, Annex 6 does include the memorandum for the accounting officers, which goes through the different responsibilities as well. So Annex 7 is the scheme of financial delegations. One thing I would say about Annex 7, which is it's a bit of a timing issue, is that this actually also features in the annual delegation letters. And what might happen sometimes is that we'll have the scheme of financial delegations in the Code of Governance. When we get our delegation letter from DFT, that will have updates from managing public money. We cannot supersede managing public money, nothing that we can do. And therefore there will be some updates on the table that we bring into the delegation letters, which may mean that they don't exactly match, but at all stages, the delegation letters and managing public money must take precedent. We've had I had some feedback from Kenna. She was looking at this, and she was asking me about, in the Code of Governance refresh, I think it's Annex 7 scheme of delegation, we do talk about final approvals, and we were saying that we should capital projects final approvals, and we were saying that it would be better to make it clear that final approval doesn't necessarily mean final as in FBC, final business case stage. It is the kind of the approval of all the stages of business cases. So that'd be SOC, OBC, FBC. So I agreed with Kenna that that could be amended, if you agree. I've also had some feedback from Richard on specifically on Annex 4. Some of the feedback is very much administrative, a few changes in terms. So rather than saying purchase cards, we should just replace with GPC cards, which we have in most of it, but not in the kind of title and a couple of other areas. Annex 6, broadly happy. The forces, couple of just minor reference changes that we have to put through. There were a couple of areas on Annex 7 which were quite interesting, which I think we will have to go through in a bit more detail. One of them was an area around expiration payments, where, and I think this is where, when I mentioned before about the difference between the delegation letter and Annex 7, that they can sometimes not match. And something that we received in our last delegation letter from DFT was around consultative payments to individuals in respect of incidents which do not involve financial loss. And currently, we can only do anything up to £500, but that has to go to Treasury. And in terms of delegation, we have up to £500 for the authority, up to £250 for the chief exec, and not applicable for the chief constable. However, that would operationally be quite burdensome if everything came to the chief exec. So I'd probably recommend in this that we, and if Richard agrees, that we change the chief constable delegation letter to delegation limit to £50. I don't know if Richard would agree or not.
Yeah, if I may come in, I absolutely do agree with that. Just for context for people in the room, the particular payments that we're concerned about here is we pay an unpleasant allowance for someone who's had to fingerprint a dead body or tidy up body parts or witness and make it evidential a CCTV viewing of someone dying in relation to a train incident. So we make payments to those individuals of £50 a time on that side. And actually, we make some quite significant payments across the force because a lot of people have to do this. My concern is there's no obvious financial loss, and this would fit into the criteria. And I'd absolutely welcome the discretion to the Chief Constable to sign these off on behalf of the force. Just for information, we paid 2,000 such payments last year at a total cost of about £100,000. But absolutely, we need to recognise that this is some of the most unpleasant things we could ask our people to be doing.
Thanks, Richard.
And then the other thing where Richard has been giving me some feedback is about the procurement authority. So currently in the Annex 7 to the authority, we have combined two of the procurement authority limits from the previous version and this version around acceptance of the lowest tender and the limits that for the chief constable on the acceptance of the lowest tender when signing contracts, and on the secondly on the acceptance of a bid where signing of contracts for any contract other than the lowest. And currently the chief constable can sign off anything where it's the lowest tender up to 1 million, or anything where it's anything other than the lowest up to 500. When we combined them, we actually chose the second of the limits for both, regardless of whether it was the lowest or not lowest. But I've just been speaking to Richard and Steph, and that would cause some operational burden, is my understanding. And therefore, I think we probably need to think about it a bit more. So what is the correct limit? And therefore, at least for now, I would say that we shouldn't change that from the existing delegation, which was signed off previously, the existing code of conduct, and we can come back to the authority with a change as well once we've done a bit more work around what is the appropriate level.
Okay, thank you, Steph.
Yeah, so I just supported that. I think what this is intending to do is to streamline the various different levels and specifications and the different types of way we have procurement authorities. The force is completely behind that as a way to do business, but what it's accidentally done as a byproduct of merging two approval levels is cut the Chief Constable's procurement authority in half from 1 million to 500,000 for the lowest cost bid, essentially, which we would use in 90% of the cases anyway because of how we conduct competitions. So practically, that's going to have a significant impact. Any invoice over 500,000, any spend that we have to satisfy that two-key approach. So it would end up introducing bureaucracy in a way that I don't think we intended to do back at those Deloitte workshops that we really and I just reflected on. So I think we just need to have a look at the implications of that. I would support keeping it at the higher end, which is 1 million, which is what it is today. It's not increasing the chief's limit any higher, but certainly not dropping it to 500,000 without proper consideration.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Nick Thompson?
Just wanted to pick up on Richard's point there. At other times when we're talking about pay equality issues, Rachel's always had this problem because the payments you talked about in respect of fatalities are referred to as bonuses, which then get included when there's problems with pay equality. You're now sort of saying that maybe they aren't bonuses, they're ex gratia payments.
I think I'm raising the risk that they could be seen in that way. They're variously referred to internally as an allowance or as a bonus on that side, but I was flagging it because I didn't want these to be precluded by this particular area because I think they are valid payments.
I understand that, and I think you're right to do so. I just raise it because it's been a problem for Rachel. I'm just wondering whether this is a time, because I said to her, why don't we stop calling them bonuses? It's not something that's under statute, and it would make our returns to government look a bit better. So I don't know, just
I think if I hear that, so I think I've been on all those conversations.
Yes.
You're quite right, it gets us such difficulty, we can call them a bonus. If we're now concerned that they look more like expiration payments, and I can certainly see the logic of that. Maybe it's a chance to start categorising expiration payments, because that's what they are, and you can solve the problem in another room. Anyway, that's Ravila and I will talk about it, but just to clarify that I've heard Andy correctly, I think I agree with him. Looks like Richard does too.
well, at audit committee, I also raised the issue that there's no doubt that with appointments and recruitment of staff within BTP is very, very, very well controlled. Right. But it always amuses me that we have provisions here within these delegated authorities for ex gratia payments, paying people off, pay awards and so on. And yet the biggest liability that isn't covered is when somebody recruits, given that 75% of our costs are staff costs. There's nothing here that overtly says someone has the authority to recruit into a post. I've ventured this issue in another place as well. But I mean, it seems to me it's an interesting imbalance or admission from a list of delegated authorities. We cover lots of things to do with personnel and employment, but not the biggest one, which is incurring a contractual liability long term for employing someone when they get a contract with employment and sign it.
Isn't that delegated to Rachel?
Well, it's a question of where is it?
Yeah,
Maybe
where is
I
it?
couldn't
Yeah.
see it. And there's no doubt that the controls within BTP are fine, absolutely fine. It's just that if this is something that's important, we write it down. How can we admit that the biggest thing we spend on? I don't know.
Interesting point, actually.
I think we agreed to think about that.
We did. It was an action on review, but it said that the action was in time for this committee, this authority meeting.
So that is something that, because this is an annual refresher, so it's definitely something that we can.
See you next year.
That's the yeah.
Motion for people to stop committing to things.
Thank you.
Well, I would say in relation to, the earlier point where BTP didn't agree with the change, then we revert to the existing system. We have got the existing system that's been with us for a long time. We need to think about your point properly because it is almost philosophical.
Yes, it is.
I've still got the action then, just before next June, we'll have gone up.
Are we content to replace the existing annexes with the new annexes as described?
Yeah, that's a great piece of work.
Thank you.
Point from Richard.
So apologies, Ron, just on the administration of that, I absolutely agree. I just note the next paper we're about to review from Hugh actually then changes what we've just agreeing there. So it's just a point of principle. I think we should note that paper as well as a change to the Code of Governance.
You're talking about the capital delegation limits paper.
Correct.
We're just coming on to that now.
Come on to that.
Yeah.
And without any further ado, capital project delegation paper.
So again, this came out of the Deloitte work. The capital delegations have been at the existing levels for quite a long time. Obviously, we've had a lot of changes in that period, including inflation, including some good GIA reports around improving governance in the BTP, and just general kind of more openness in the ways that we work, in the way that BTP and BTPA work together. As I noted, BTPA officials sit on PSIP, which is chaired by the deputy, and there's much more open relationship between the two. Deloitte did some work for us around looking at other forces, around the limits that other forces have with regards to capital limit delegation, and as you can see from the table in the paper, there's quite a big difference to some people who have a zero limit to other people who have got up to 3 million, which is quite surprising. Our recommendation is that we increase the bands, with the chief constable's limit going from up to 250 to up to 500, the chief exec's limit going from 500 to up to 1 million, and the authority's limit going to over 1 million. We did look at the different cases that came in the last couple of years and what that would have meant, if those limits had been in place. And I think when I spoke to Hugh about it, the only one that he kind of felt required the level of scrutiny that it had at the time was the Oracle. Now that would now be within Hugh's delegation, and as the paper says, there's no reason for either the chief constable, if she wishes, or the chief exec to not ask authority to have a look at business cases if they think that added scrutiny would be beneficial. And that could have been the case for the Oracle licenses had the chief exec wished. So I mean, just there are good arguments for increasing the limit to 500,000, and that's what for the chief constable, and that's what the recommendation for this.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions?
So I've just got a comment on this, which is I don't think the evidence provided is particularly strong to support this. I'm not saying I'm against change to limits, but I don't think the rationale that's been put to us as authority is compelling. So I suppose the question, I don't know whether it's revealed, there's not a comparability of why we would do this. And so I think personally, I would want to see more evidence to support this fully. It's not particularly an issue of who signs what off, but we're being asked to change something and support something without the evidence there in the document to support that from my perspective.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is always going to be a difficult one because it's arbitrary, really, isn't it, in terms of where you're going to land with this. And you can see that when you look at the table in the paper, which is at 3.4, Kent get a 0.
Yeah.
And then you've got the Met Police who are at 500,000, and then you've got West Yorkshire at 3 million. So there is, I understand your reflection, but I don't think there is like what additional evidence base can we present to provide that confidence. I mean, it is something that I would really support. I think in terms of the journey we've been on in the last 2 years in terms of greater collaborative working, I think that this is a step which will enable us to work more effectively and more efficiently without dialing down the level of scrutiny that's inevitably going to be there through the relevant committees. But I just think if there was more of an exact science, then you'd see more consistency across police forces, just generally from a national perspective. But there's simply not, and I think potentially some of this does reflect the confidence in the ways of working as to where you're going to shift the delegation to. So even if we were to move to this on Ravila's recommendation, and then potentially put a review period in to see if there's any points of concern, I think that would be helpful.
And maybe reviews the solution. I mean, what I would say is I don't know why we've only got sort of half a dozen forces there when there's 43. So I think
they're the most comparable, with the exception of the Met and Police Scotland. They're the ones that are the most comparable in terms of budget. Yeah. Because some of them are so much smaller. They're a fifth smaller than us most of them.
I mean, the principle that I always understood is that people require delegated authorities that enable them to get on with their day-to-day job without having to refer up. So if once a year you have to refer up to get permission for X, Y, Z, or get authority for X, Y, Z, that's okay, because that's not really an impediment. So I think it is more about an issue of trust, and it's a good thing to do, rather than as required, because clearly the kind of isn't, unless we've said that all of these projects last year or authorities last year were held up for months and months and months because we couldn't agree things, and the business, as it were, the force suffered as a result. I don't think we're saying that. And there are other checks and balances anyway that say there's a bit of an odd one, like the Oracle licenses was one where you probably go, oh, flipping out, we've discovered something. We probably ought to share that because it's a good thing to share. So I have no problem with it, but generally, actually, the evidence here, not from the other forces, but from what we spend, says it doesn't really matter because day to day you haven't got a problem doing your job. But if we want to give you a million authority, I'm so sorry, 500,000. It's not a problem in a sense.
Well, I mean, I agree with that, and when we approached it, I wondered how many of these examples there'd been. That's why I was, having accepted that paragraph 3.4 is not conclusive, as you say, because I mean, it frankly doesn't really lead one way or the other. It just shows you that policing is not consistent with itself. I was then more drawn to paragraph 3.6, which was the examples where this has actually been relevant. What I could say, and this is a direct answer to Andy's point, is that the December 2021 clutch of 6 estate projects were a bit of a kerfuffle between us. So those did have to come to me at that time. And it was all about, I can't remember whether we found some money from the department. Anyway, it was money that had to be spent quickly, and they had a lot of work to assure that projects could be done by the end of March, the usual stuff, etc., etc. And frankly, at that time, getting it through me was an extra leg the force probably could have done without. And then when I did look at it, I agreed it was money the department had provided, the work had been done. What value was I adding? So in that very small list, there is an example. If I'd been, I don't know, on leave or stress, it could have been more difficult. So I think it just passes the it matters tests on that one example. My other thought is that, we just haven't changed these for a long time. So there has been inflation, like Julia said. I know not quite inflation at this time, but we haven't changed it for a long time. There is a tonal point that Lucy points out just about making use of some of the improved relationships across our two organisations in recent times. And I guess my last assurance is it's not personal. At least I've looked at it as it's not personal. So I don't think this is because this is Lucy and this is me. Well, I know it's not because it's Lucy and this is me. You might worry about that. Obviously, this document is written for a future chief constable and a future chief executive, and I've looked at it completely person neutrally. From that point of view, I'm happy with it.
Any other points? Steph?
A brief but perennial frustration that won't be a surprise to you, and a suggestion. The quirk of this part of the Code of Governance is because it's a financial delegation, albeit capital. Financial delegations are normally discharged through the meeting structures, which is a reasonable and democratic way that we do it. So the Chief Constable gives her delegation through FEB. the authority, give their delegation through strategy planning committee and full authority. Hugh doesn't have a meeting essentially that he chairs in the middle. So what it gives us is a bubble that means that you can take stuff through the meeting structures up to the chief constable and beyond the chief executive level. Although the capital limits have increased, it slightly moves that problem. So my suggestion is that we keep the levels as proposed in this, and we keep the gap, but we look at through that joint governance review how we can stop turning everything into correspondence through a blue folder just in that middle bubble of the governance, and we figure out a quicker and more practical way to do that that doesn't leave us with much more bureaucracy right in the middle with that gap between the two meetings each side. Don't know if that makes sense. It will for people that deal with it.
Yeah, no, we definitely should look at it. It's a whole, I think I look at it from the other end of the telescope.
Yeah.
I always thought meetings with, you've got to wait 3 months, and some media advantages, you just bung an email and get a reply. But I've definitely got to listen to, if it doesn't feel like that. I have, historically, to have to wait for a meeting, I've always resiled against. As Alistair knows, I quite often try and push the boundaries of trying to get the authority to agree things outside of the committee, because I feel a bit personally that we're holding things up by waiting for 3 months if we're just waiting for it. So that's where I come from, different at the telescope, but I've got to listen to the people putting the work in. I agree.
Really quickly, yeah, delegations must sit with individuals, not committees, and it should save time, not add time for one individual to sign things off. So I think that's the first point. Second point is I support this and the basis of renewed ways of working. I think it would be worth doing a review after a year to see actually how many business cases have been affected. Has it saved time? Has it been a better system? I think we should prove it with high confidence it will work rather than saying in the middle, sure, that's my view, but high confidence is fully satisfactory. And noting again that anything's not potential that we can customize the test anyway.
I do think we probably just need to get into the detail of how it's feeling to us isn't feeling to other people. So I think, if we can unpick that, I think that's the key point that staff could reflect on. And, I do feel that quite acutely enforced when I speak to people. So I agree with you. I mean, the evidence base is interesting. There's equally no evidence, there's an absence of evidence to say keeping it at the level where it is. So chop and change it each way. But I think we can probably trust the people to unpick this and come up with the most fluid way. I mean, London Estates is the one that's lingering to test us on the sort of flexibility and agility of decision making, isn't it?
Right, I'm conscious of the time. Are we content to approve these higher delegated limits on the basis that we review them after a year? Make sure that we think it's working okay, and we can also pick it up as Steph has suggested in terms of the joint board evaluation of authority. Are we content? Thank you very much. And we now have a break. I understand, Alistair. Before this break starts, I'd just like to mention something I forgot to mention at the beginning, which I should have done, and I apologise. Of course, this is being recorded. The good news is none of you have said anything bad, as far as I've been able to work out, although I will listen to the recording later to find out. Thank you very much. I didn't mention the Chief Constable's t-shirt.